Hello, everyone. Some of you might remember a few weeks ago I made a video about who would be my dream cast if the Ecstasy and the Ignominy were turned into a movie. Well, now I'm going to do a cast, but it's going to be a more modern day, realistic cast of if the Ecstasy and the Ignominy were turned into a movie today. Who might, if the casting were up to me, who might I cast as the characters? Now, of course, in a lot of cases, the the writer of a book has no control over who is cast in a film adaptation of their work. And so, realistically, if the Ecstasy and the Ignominy were turned into a film, I would probably have no control over it. But let's just assume that I do. And I will mention one caveat is that if I were actually in charge of casting a film for the Ecstasy and the Ignominy, I wouldn't necessarily always go with big name actors. Sometimes I may try to find actors who look like they stepped out of the pages of the book, but even if they don't necessarily have a famous name. So I wouldn't necessarily cast all of these actors if I were actually casting the Ecstasy and the Ignominy. But this is if I only had to draw on famous names, who would I cast? And so I want to make that caveat very clear. I think there are the part of Bertrand Shaw and the part of Frederick Harris. I think those are kind of star parts. I think that those would benefit from veteran actors playing them, but the other roles wouldn't necessarily have to be played by someone famous. So it would probably be a combination of casting based on auditions and also casting known names. So if I were in charge, not all of these people would be cast, even if they were available to cast. So I just want to make that clear. But this is if I only have had to draw on famous names. So for the character of Catherine, who is the main character, I might cast Vanessa Kirby, who is probably one of my favorite actresses working today. She has a very enchanting presence that I find to be very alluring, and so I think that many of her characteristics would fit the character of Catherine very well. The only problem with potentially casting Vanessa Kirby is that she is a little young for the part, but the thing is that and because Catherine is in her 40s, is described as in her 40s, whereas Vanessa Kirby is in her 30s. But that wouldn't necessarily be a problem because one of the things that authors need to consider is that even if their book does become optioned to turn into a movie, it can take sometimes years or decades for that to actually happen. It can be stuck in production hell. So quite often you need to think of if you want an actor to play a character that you've written, you might want to think of an actor who is a little too young for the part, because then by the time the movie gets made, they'll actually be old enough. And it also wouldn't be that big of a deal if Catherine was in her 30s instead of in her 40s. If anything, it would make the relationship between her and her husband even more stark. And you would just have to change some dialogue about, instead of them being married for like 30 years, it'd be more like 20. But no, I think Vanessa Kirby would be a good choice. And plus, quite often characters are aged up and down in adaptations all the time. And so now for the part of Edward Compton, I may cast what's his name? Fabian. I honestly can't read what I wrote the last name. Fabian Frankel. I may not be pronouncing all these names right. And who plays a Christian Cole in House of the Dragon. Now the part of Edward is actually quite difficult to cast because I need an actor who's fairly young but who also has a good presence, who has a good voice. And so I'm probably, when it comes to the character of Edward Compton, I'm probably the least certain about this casting. I think that Fabian Frankel or whatever, he has the right look for it. I'm not sure how well he could do an American accent. But I do think that he would be a good potential choice because most of the characters in the Ecstasy and the Ignominy are American, except for Catherine, who's British, and the character of Bertrand Shaw, who's Irish. But but there are a lot of European actors who can do American accents. In the past, there were actually, like, when I think of like actors from the past, there are a lot of great American actors that I like. But now, a lot of the actors that I like, not all, but a lot of them are European now, because Europeans have maintained kind of a presence a dignified presence that a lot of American actors, frankly, lack. Now, for the part of Frederick Harris, Catherine's husband, I may cast Kelsey Grammer, who, of course, was on Frasier. And it's not only because I've been watching a lot of Frasier lately, especially because he has what I would call the character Frederick Harris has to speak eloquently, but he's also kind of gruff at the same time. And I think Kelsey Grammer has those characteristics. For the part of Desmond Archer, I might cast Tom Hardy. John Malkovich would have been great for it a few years ago, but he's too old now. But I think Tom Hardy might be a good choice. For the part of, again, that's for the part of Desmond Archer. For the part of Reverend Heartstone, I might cast Timothy Chalamet, whatever, from Dune, because Reverend Heartstone is rather young. He's in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, and he's smug, and I think Timothy Chalamet kind of has the right look for that. I thought about casting him as Edward Compton, but I think he's a bit too thin to be Edward. And then for the part of Mary Ingram, I might cast Natalie Homer, who was who played Marjorie in Game of Thrones. I really like her eyes. She has very alluring eyes, and I think and she has this what I would call a mature, dignified presence that I think would work very well for the character of Mary Ingram. And then for the part of the witch, I might cast Frances Fisher, who is, of course, who was in Titanic as Rose's mother. I think she has kind of that kind of look to her. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing some of these names correctly, but then for the part of Jean, for the part of Thomas Lockhart, I might cast Sal Rubinick, who was also in Frasier, but he's kind of looks like a bumbling businessman, and I think just he has the right look for it. For the part of Rachel, I might cast Bryce Dallas Howard, who of course is the daughter of Ron Howard, who was in Jurassic Park. And now, the part of Rachel is probably the smallest part, so it wouldn't necessarily have to be played by a major star. But at the same time, the part, it might be small in terms of the amounts of scenes she's in, but the dialogue that she says matters. Rachel has some very poignant dialogue. So even though she's not in a lot of the book, she's kind of the comic relief, but she's kind of what you might call the fool of the Shakespearean fool of the Ecstasy and the Ignominy. She says a lot of true things, but with comedy. And so she's a very important character, even though she has the smallest part in terms of appearances. Then finally, for the part of Bertrand Shaw, I might cast Liam Neeson, who's Irish. Bertrand Shaw is Irish. And also I think that I've been reading about Liam Neeson's life recently, and some of the things that he's gone through kind of mirror some of the things that Bertrand Shaw went through. So I think it would be a very good fit. He would be a very good fit for that reason. So again, those are just some of the characters, some of the actors who I might cast in an adaptation of the Ecstasy and the Ignominy, but again, if I were actually casting it, I would probably do some auditions and would cast some lesser known actors, maybe some actors from theater and so forth, because the dialogue in the Ecstasy and the Ignominy is very rich, and so you might need some actors who have some background in theater. And so, but again, if I were only drawing from famous names, I may cast some of these actors if the decision were up to me.